The train lurched to a stop at Cherry Creek, Nevada, and Hannah Keller pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching dust devils spiral across the barren platform as if the desert itself was warning her to turn back. She had traveled over 2,000 miles from Boston to marry a man she had never met, and now her hands trembled as she gathered her carpetbag and adjusted the high collar of her dress, making certain every inch of damaged skin remained hidden beneath layers of fabric. The year was 1883, and second chances were hard to come by for a woman with a past written in scars across her body. The conductor offered his hand as she descended the steps, and Hannah forced a smile despite the scorching June heat that immediately made her regret the long sleeves and high neckline she insisted on wearing. Cherry Creek was smaller than she had imagined, just a handful of buildings scattered along a dusty main street, with the promise of silver in the nearby hills being the only reason anyone had bothered to settle here at all. She scanned the sparse crowd gathered at the station, searching for the face that matched the single photograph she carried in her reticule. Samuel Morrison was supposed to meet her here. Their correspondence over the past 6 months had been cordial if not particularly warm, and he had assured her that he needed a wife to help manage his general store and perhaps provide companionship in this isolated corner of Nevada. Hannah had been honest about her circumstances, or at least as honest as a woman in her position could afford to be. She had told him she was 24 years old, orphaned, and working as a seamstress in Boston with no family and few prospects. She had not told him about the fire that had claimed her parents and younger brother 3 years ago, or about the scars that covered her left shoulder, arm, and parts of her chest and neck where burning timber had pinned her down while she screamed. "Miss Keller." A ready voice broke through her thoughts, and Hannah turned to find a man in his 50s with thinning hair and nervous eyes approaching her. "I am afraid I have some unfortunate news. Samuel Morrison took ill last week with pneumonia and passed away 3 days ago." The words hit her like a physical blow, and Hannah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She had spent every penny she had on the train ticket west, had burned her bridges in Boston by giving up her small room and her seamstress position. She had no money, no home, and now no husband waiting for her in this God-forsaken desert town. "I am terribly sorry," the man continued, wringing his hat in his hands. "I am Edwin Pritchard, the town clerk. Samuel was a friend, and I promised I would meet any correspondence he might have coming. If you need assistance purchasing a return ticket to Boston, perhaps we can make arrangements with the church fund." Hannah shook her head, pride stiffening her spine even as panic clawed at her chest. "That will not be necessary. I will find other arrangements." She had no idea what those arrangements might be, but she refused to become a charity case in a town where she had not even spent an hour. Edwin looked uncertain but nodded. "The boarding house is just down the street. Mrs. Fletcher might have a room available, and perhaps she knows of work in town." He tipped his hat and retreated quickly, leaving Hannah standing alone on the platform with her carpetbag and her rapidly crumbling composure. The sun beat down mercilessly as Hannah made her way toward the boarding house, her dark dress absorbing every ray of heat until sweat trickled down her spine. She passed a saloon with tinny piano music drifting through the swinging doors, a livery stable, the late Samuel Morrison's general store with a black wreath hanging on the door, and finally a 2-story wooden structure with a painted sign declaring it to be Fletcher's boarding house. Mrs. Fletcher turned out to be a stout woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She listened to Hannah's explanation with pursed lips, then named a price for the room that would consume the last few dollars Hannah possessed within a week. "I will need to find work immediately," Hannah said, trying to keep desperation from her voice. "Are there any positions available in town?" Mrs. Fletcher considered this. "The Silver Star Saloon is always looking for girls, but I do not imagine that is what you have in mind. There is a ranch about 5 miles north of town, the Double H. The owner, Jacob Hayes, has been looking for someone to help keep house and cook for his men. His last housekeeper married one of the ranch hands and moved to California. The work would be hard, but Jacob is fair and pays decent wages." Hannah seized on this information like a lifeline. "How might I contact Mr. Hayes about the position?" "He comes into town every Saturday for supplies. That is tomorrow. You could speak with him then, or if you are feeling bold, you could ride out to the ranch today. The livery rents horses, though I suppose that might be beyond your budget at the moment." "I will wait until tomorrow," Hannah decided, though the thought of spending precious money on another night's lodging made her stomach clench with anxiety. She had no choice but to trust that this opportunity would materialize, and that this Jacob Hayes would be willing to hire a complete stranger sight unseen. That evening, Hannah lay in the small, spare room at the boarding house and stared at the ceiling, listening to unfamiliar sounds of the desert night filtering through the window. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and closer by, raucous laughter erupted from the saloon down the street. She thought about Samuel Morrison, a man she had never met but who had represented security and a fresh start. She thought about the scars hidden beneath her nightgown, the ridged and puckered skin that she could barely stand to look at herself. She thought about the fire, the way it had sounded like a living creature as it consumed everything she had known, the way her mother's screams had cut off so suddenly. Hannah pressed her hands over her eyes and forced the memories back into the locked corner of her mind where they belonged. She had survived the fire. She had survived the painful months of recovery, the pitying looks, the way her fiancé had gently but firmly broken their engagement when he saw the extent of her injuries. She had survived the loneliness of the past 3 years, the endless days of sewing other women's wedding dresses and christening gowns while her own future seemed to narrow to nothing. She would survive this too. The next morning dawned clear and already warm, promising another scorching day. Hannah dressed carefully in her second-best dress, a dark blue cotton that covered her from neck to wrists to ankles despite the heat. She plaited her honey blonde hair and pinned it into a severe bun at the nape of her neck, then regarded herself in the small mirror above the washstand. Her face was pale, her green eyes too large in her thin face, but at least her features were unmarred. The scars that began just above her collarbone remained hidden beneath the high collar. She took her breakfast in the boarding house dining room with the handful of other residents, mostly men who worked in the silver mines or the few businesses in town. They paid her little attention, for which she was grateful. After breakfast, Hannah positioned herself on the boarding house porch with her sewing kit, mending a tear in one of her petticoats, while she watched the street for any sign of a rancher coming to town for supplies. Around mid-morning, a wagon rolled down the main street and stopped in front of the general store. Hannah's breath caught as she watched a tall man swing down from the driver's seat with easy grace. He wore dusty work clothes, a broad-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, and moved with the confident, economical motions of someone accustomed to hard physical labor. Even from a distance, Hannah could see the breadth of his shoulders and the lean, muscular build that came from years of ranch work. Mrs. Fletcher appeared on the porch beside her, wiping her hands on her apron. "That is Jacob Hayes right there. Best get yourself over to him before he finishes his business and heads back to the ranch." Hannah's heart hammered as she set aside her mending and smoothed her skirts. She had talked herself into and out of this plan a dozen times over the course of the morning, but desperation outweighed fear. She crossed the dusty street, her boots kicking up small clouds with each step, and approached the wagon just as the man was loading a sack of flour into the bed. "Excuse me, Mr. Hayes." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He turned, and Hannah got her first clear look at his face. Jacob Hayes was perhaps 30 years old, with sun-bronzed skin, a strong jaw shadowed with a few days' growth of beard, and striking blue eyes that studied her with open curiosity. A jagged scar ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline, the mark of some old injury that had healed white against his tanned skin. He was handsome in a rugged, weathered way that made Hannah's pulse quicken unexpectedly. "That would be me," he said, his voice a deep baritone with a hint of the South softening his words. "What can I do for you, madam? My name is Hannah Keller. I arrived in town yesterday from Boston, and I understand you might be looking for a housekeeper and cook for your ranch." She clasped her hands in front of her to keep them from shaking. Jacob's eyebrows rose. "News travels fast in a small town. You understand that would mean living at the ranch. It is too far to make the trip daily." "I understand. I am a hard worker, Mr. Hayes. I can cook, clean and manage household accounts. I have references from Boston, though I realize they do me little good out here." She met his eyes squarely, willing him to see her competence, and not ask too many questions about why a woman from Boston was desperate enough to take a position as a ranch housekeeper in the middle of the Nevada desert. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze taking in her practical dress, her work-worn hands, the determined set of her jaw. "I will be honest with you, Miss Keller. I have 8 men working the ranch, and it is rough country. The work would be demanding, and the accommodations are simple. You would have your own room in the main house, separate from the bunkhouse where the men sleep, and I would expect 3 meals a day plus laundry and general housekeeping. I can pay $25 a month plus room and board." $25 was more than Hannah had made as a seamstress, and room and board meant security she had not had since before the fire. "Those terms are acceptable, Mr. Hayes. You can call me Jacob." He pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, and Hannah saw uncertainty flicker across his face. "I have to ask, Miss Keller, what brings a woman from Boston all the way to Cherry Creek, Nevada, looking for work as a housekeeper?" "That is quite a journey for quite a comedown, if you do not mind me saying." Hannah had prepared for this question, but her throat still tightened as she delivered the half-truth she had rehearsed. "I was to marry a gentleman in town, but he passed away before I arrived. I have no family in Boston and nothing to return to. I need work, and you need a housekeeper. It seems like a practical arrangement for both of us." Something shifted in Jacob's expression, a softening around his eyes that might have been sympathy or understanding. "I am sorry for your loss." That must have been a hard shock. He settled his hat back on his head and nodded decisively. "All right, Miss Keller. The job is yours if you want it. I am heading back to the ranch within the hour. Can you be ready by then?" Relief flooded through Hannah so powerfully that her knees went weak. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Hayes. Jacob, you will not regret this." A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I hope not. Meet me back here in an hour." Hannah practically ran back to the boarding house, paid Mrs. Fletcher for the previous night, and gathered her few belongings. Within 45 minutes, she was seated beside Jacob on the wagon bench, her carpetbag stowed in the back, rolling out of Cherry Creek toward an uncertain future at the Double H Ranch. The journey took just over an hour along a rough track that wound through sagebrush and rocky terrain. Jacob pointed out landmarks as they went, a distinctive rock formation that marked the boundary of his land, a dry creek bed that would flow with water during the brief rainy season. the distant mountains that held the silver mines responsible for Cherry Creek's existence. He spoke easily, his voice pleasant, and asked her general questions about her journey west that Hannah answered carefully, revealing little of substance. "That scar on your eyebrow," she said, surprising herself with her boldness. "Was that from ranch work?" Jacob's hand went unconsciously to the mark, and he chuckled. "In a manner of speaking. A stallion took exception to me trying to break him about 5 years back. He won that round, but we came to an understanding eventually. I still have him, actually. Best horse I ever owned." Hannah found herself studying the scar, noting how it gave his face character rather than detracting from his looks. It must have been a serious injury. 12 stitches, and I saw stars for a week, but I have had worse. He glanced at her with those disconcerting blue eyes. "Scars are just proof we survived something, I figure. No shame in that." Hannah's hand went instinctively to her collar, checking that it was secure, and she turned her gaze to the passing landscape. "I suppose that is one way to look at it." They crested a low rise, and the double H spread out before them. The main house was a sprawling single-story adobe structure with a covered porch running along the front. Nearby stood a barn, a bunkhouse, several corrals, and various outbuildings. It was rough and weathered but well maintained, and Hannah felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. This could be a home, at least for a while. Jacob pulled the wagon up in front of the main house, and immediately several men emerged from various directions, curious to see who their boss had brought back with him. Jacob introduced her quickly to the assembled group. There was Tom, the grizzled foreman who looked to be in his 60s. Young Billy, barely 18 with a shock of red hair and a friendly grin. Marcus and James, brothers in their 30s who worked the cattle, and several others whose names blurred together in Hannah's nervous mind. "This is Miss Hannah Keller, our new housekeeper and cook," Jacob announced. "I expect you all to treat her with respect and make her feel welcome. Miss Keller, these gentlemen will be grateful for any meal that does not include burnt beans and hardtack, so you have already won their affection." This earned a round of chuckles, and Hannah managed a small smile. The men seemed decent enough, rough but polite, and they tipped their hats to her before dispersing back to their work. Jacob carried her carpetbag into the house and showed her to a small but clean room off the kitchen. It had a narrow bed, a washstand, a small chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over the desert. It was simple, but it was hers. "The kitchen is through there," Jacob said, gesturing to the adjoining room. "It is reasonably well stocked, and I brought back fresh supplies from town today. The men usually eat at 6 in the morning, noon, and 6 in the evening, but nobody expects you to start until tomorrow. Take today to get yourself settled." He paused in the doorway, his expression thoughtful. "I know this is not what you planned when you left Boston, Miss Keller, but I hope you will find the Double H to be a good place to land." "Thank you, Jacob. I already do." Hannah surprised herself by meaning it. After he left, Hannah unpacked her meager belongings and explored the kitchen. It was larger than she expected, with a massive iron stove, a long wooden table where the men presumably took their meals, and shelves stocked with staples. She found flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, coffee, and various canned goods. The root cellar yielded potatoes, onions, and a few withered carrots. She could work with this. As evening approached, Hannah realized Jacob had not made any provision for his own dinner, despite telling her she could wait until tomorrow to begin. She rolled up her sleeves carefully, making sure the cuffs remained buttoned at her wrists, and set about making a simple stew with salt pork, potatoes, and onions, along with a batch of biscuits. The familiar rhythm of cooking settled her nerves, and by the time Jacob appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the scents wafting through the house. She had a meal ready. "I thought you were taking the evening to settle in," he said, but his eyes lit up at the sight of the table set for two. "I am settled enough, and you mentioned burnt beans and hardtack. I thought I would demonstrate that you made a good hiring decision." Hannah ladled stew into bowls, her movements practiced and efficient. They ate together at the kitchen table, as the desert sunset painted the sky outside in shades of orange and purple. Jacob told her more about the ranch, how he had built it up over the past 10 years from nothing, how the cattle business was steady if not particularly lucrative, how he hoped to expand his operation if the silver mines kept Cherry Creek alive long enough. Hannah listened and asked questions and carefully avoided sharing too much about herself. "You keep tugging at your collar," Jacob observed midway through the meal. "I keep the house as cool as I can, but it gets hot out here. You do not have to dress so formally for ranch life." Hannah's hand froze where she had indeed been adjusting her collar. "I am comfortable, thank you." Something flickered in Jacob's eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or concern, but he did not press. Instead, he changed the subject to the supplies he had brought back from town, and the moment passed. Over the following weeks, Hannah settled into a routine at the Double H. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the men, spent her mornings cleaning and doing laundry, prepared a midday meal, attended to mending and other household tasks in the afternoon, and cooked dinner in the evening. The work was exhausting, but it was honest and straightforward, and she found satisfaction in seeing the ranch house transform under her care. She scrubbed floors and windows, organized the chaotic pantry, repaired torn clothing and linens, and gradually made the house feel less like a bachelor dwelling and more like a proper home. The men were respectful and appreciative of her cooking, which was substantially better than what they had been enduring. They thanked her for every meal, complimented her biscuits and pies, and went out of their way to make her feel welcome. Young Billy in particular seemed eager to please, often volunteering to carry water or chop wood for the stove, his face flushing red whenever she smiled at him. But it was Jacob who occupied more and more of Hannah's thoughts. He was unfailingly courteous, often helping with tasks that were not his responsibility, like carrying heavy pots or fixing a sticky window in her room. He had a quiet strength about him, a steadiness that Hannah found deeply appealing. When he smiled, which he did more readily as the weeks passed, it transformed his entire face, crinkling the corners of his eyes and revealing a warmth that made her heart skip. He was also perceptive in ways that made Hannah nervous. He noticed when she favored her left arm during particularly heavy work, though she tried to hide the fact that the scarred muscles sometimes ached. He noticed that she always wore long sleeves and high collars despite the oppressive heat, that she never joined the men on the porch in the evenings, that she kept herself carefully separate from everyone. One evening in late July, nearly a month after Hannah's arrival, Jacob found her in the kitchen after dinner, standing at the wash basin with her sleeves rolled up to her elbows as she scrubbed pots. He had come in to refill his coffee cup, but stopped short in the doorway, and Hannah realized with horror that she had forgotten to maintain her usual vigilance. The scars on her left forearm were fully visible, angry red and white ridges where the skin had melted and healed badly. Hannah immediately plunged her arms into the soapy water and turned her back to him, but it was too late. She felt his presence behind her, felt the weight of his gaze on her damaged skin. "Hannah." His voice was gentle. "You do not have to hide from me." "I am not hiding," she said, her voice tight. "I am washing dishes. You have been here a month and it must be 100 degrees in this kitchen. You are wearing a dress that buttons to your chin and covers every inch of you. You are hiding." He paused. "The fire that killed your family." You were caught in it too. It was not a question. Hannah kept her eyes on the soapy water, blinking back tears. How did you know? I did not for certain, but I guessed. The way you move sometimes, like it hurts. The way you never let anyone see beneath your sleeves or collar. And just now, the scars on your arm. His voice grew softer. I am sorry. For your family, for your pain, for whatever you went through. Hannah's shoulders shook with the effort of holding back sobs. They are hideous. The scars. They cover my shoulder, my arm, parts of my chest and neck. I look like a monster. No. The word came out firm and certain. You look like someone who survived something terrible. That is not the same thing at all. She shook her head, unable to speak. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of water dripping from her hands back into the basin. Then she felt Jacob's hand, tentative and warm, rest gently on her right shoulder, the unmarred one. You do not have to show me, he said quietly. But you do not have to hide either, not here. Not from me. Whatever you think those scars make you, you are wrong. You are the woman who crossed a continent alone to start over. You are the woman who makes the best apple pie in Nevada and who got young Billy to finally start washing his neck properly. You are the woman who has made this house feel like a home for the first time since my mother died. Those are the things I see when I look at you, Hannah. The tears came then, sliding down her cheeks as something inside her chest cracked open. No one had spoken to her with such kindness, such acceptance, since before the fire. Her former fiancé had barely been able to look at her injuries. Her fellow boarders in Boston had whispered and stared. But Jacob stood behind her in the warm kitchen, his hand steady on her shoulder, and offered her something she had thought was lost forever, the possibility of being seen as whole. I was trapped under a burning beam, she whispered. I could hear my mother screaming, my brother crying, but I could not get free. By the time the neighbors pulled me out, they were already gone, and I was so badly burned the doctors did not think I would survive. I wish sometimes that I had not. I am glad you did, Jacob said simply. Otherwise you would not be here, and that would be a damn shame. Hannah turned then, her wet hands still dripping, and looked up into his face. His blue eyes were warm with understanding, and she saw truth there, not pity. On impulse, she reached up with her right hand and touched the scar on his eyebrow. You said scars are proof we survived. I am trying to believe that. It is true. He caught her hand gently and lowered it, but did not let go. Give yourself time, Hannah. You have survived more than most people could imagine. Let yourself believe that you are still worth something. I am worth $25 a month and room and board, she said, trying for humor through her tears. Jacob laughed, a rich sound that filled the kitchen. You are worth considerably more than that, and we both know it. He released her hand reluctantly. Get some rest. Tomorrow is Saturday, and I am going into town for supplies. I thought you might like to come along, do some shopping or visiting, get away from the ranch for a few hours. Hannah nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I would like that. After Jacob left, Hannah finished the dishes and retired to her room. She stood before the small mirror and slowly, carefully, unbuttoned her collar. The scars began just above her collarbone on the left side. Angry swirls of damaged tissue that climbed up her neck and disappeared into her hairline. She unbuttoned her dress further and eased it off her shoulder, revealing the full extent of the damage, the puckered skin that covered her entire left shoulder and upper arm, extending across her chest and back. The skin was tight in places, ridged in others, a patchwork of red, white, and pink where it had healed badly. She had avoided looking at herself for so long that the sight still had the power to shock her. But tonight, with Jacob's words echoing in her mind, she tried to see what he claimed to see, not a monster but a survivor. It was hard. The scars were still hideous to her eyes, still marked her as damaged and broken. But perhaps, in time, she could learn to see them differently. Perhaps, with Jacob's steady presence and quiet acceptance, she could learn to see herself as something more than the worst day of her life. The trip to Cherry Creek the next day was pleasant despite the heat. Hannah sat beside Jacob on the wagon bench and watched the familiar landscape roll past, feeling more at peace than she had in months. In town, Jacob conducted his business at the general store while Hannah visited the dry goods shop and purchased fabric for new curtains in the ranch house kitchen. The selection was limited, but she found a cheerful yellow cotton that would brighten the space. As they were loading the wagon for the return journey, a commotion erupted down the street. Raised voices carried on the still air, and Hannah turned to see a group of men gathered outside the saloon. Jacob's expression darkened, and he started in that direction with Hannah following at a distance. The argument seemed to center on a card game gone wrong. Accusations of cheating flying between a well-dressed gambler and a dusty cowhand Hannah did not recognize. The situation escalated quickly, and suddenly the cowhand drew his pistol. Jacob moved faster than Hannah would have thought possible, stepping between the two men with his hands raised. "Put the gun away, Chet," Jacob said calmly. "This is not worth killing a man over." "He cheated me," the cowhand Chet snarled. "Took 3 months' wages. Maybe he did, maybe he did not, but shooting him will just get you hanged." Jacob's voice remained steady, reasonable. "Put the gun down, walk away, and count this as an expensive lesson learned." For a terrible moment, Hannah thought Chet would pull the trigger anyway. But then the tension drained from his shoulders, and he lowered the weapon. The gambler took the opportunity to disappear into the saloon, and the gathered crowd dispersed. Jacob clapped Chet on the shoulder, spoke to him quietly for a moment, then returned to where Hannah waited by the wagon. "That could have ended badly," she said, her heart still racing. "It could have," Jacob agreed, "but usually these things are just men blowing off steam. Most folks do not actually want to kill each other, they just need someone to remind them of that fact." He helped her onto the wagon bench. "I am sorry you had to see that. Cherry Creek is usually quieter." "I do not mind," Hannah said truthfully. "I am just glad you were there to stop it." As they rode back to the ranch, Hannah found herself studying Jacob's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the capable hands holding the reins, the calm competence he had demonstrated in a dangerous situation. Somewhere between arriving at the Double H a month ago and this moment, her feelings for him had shifted from gratitude to something deeper and more complicated. She was falling in love with him, she realized, with a mixture of excitement and terror. But what could she offer a man like Jacob? She was damaged, scarred inside and out, with nothing to her name but the clothes on her back and the shadows of a tragic past. He deserved someone whole and unspoiled, someone who could give him children without flinching at the thought of being touched, someone who did not wake screaming from nightmares of fire. She pushed the thoughts aside and focused on the desert landscape, trying to ignore the ache building in her chest. The summer heat intensified through August, and the ranch work became even more demanding. Hannah rose earlier and worked later, trying to keep the house as comfortable as possible for the men who came in exhausted from their labor. Jacob spent long days moving cattle to higher pastures where the grazing was better, often coming home after dark, but he always made time to stop by the kitchen to talk with Hannah while she finished cleaning up from dinner. These evening conversations became the highlight of Hannah's days. They talked about everything and nothing: Jacob's plans for the ranch, Hannah's memories of Boston before the fire, books they had read, dreams they had entertained as children. Jacob had wanted to be a ship's captain when he was young. He confessed with a self-deprecating laugh, which was ridiculous for a boy growing up in Arkansas with no ocean in sight. Hannah admitted that she had once dreamed of being a painter, that she had loved capturing light and shadow on canvas, but had not touched a brush since the fire. "Why not?" Jacob asked. Hannah looked down at her scarred left hand, the fingers that did not quite flex the way they once had. "My hand does not work the way it used to. The fine motor control is gone. Your left hand maybe, but what about your right?" When Hannah did not answer, Jacob stood and disappeared into another room, returning with a pencil and a scrap of paper. "Draw something. Anything." "Jacob, I cannot try." He placed the pencil in her right hand and waited. Hannah stared at the blank paper, her throat tight. She had not attempted to draw in 3 years, had convinced herself that part of her life was as dead as her family. But Jacob's expectant gaze pushed her forward, and she put pencil to paper. Her hand shook at first, but then muscle memory took over, and she found herself sketching the view from the kitchen window, the desert scrub, the mountains in the distance, the endless sky. It was rough and unpracticed, but it was there, the ability she had thought lost forever. "See," Jacob said softly, "still in there, just needed to be remembered." Hannah set down the pencil and looked at him, this man who kept finding pieces of her she thought were broken beyond repair, and showing her they could still function. "Thank you. Nothing to thank me for. You did the work." He studied her sketch with genuine interest. "That is really good, Hannah. You should keep at it." Over the following weeks, Hannah began drawing again in the quiet hours between dinner and sleep. She sketched the ranch, the men at work, the horses in the corral, and frequently, without quite meaning to, Jacob. There was something about the planes of his face, the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, the strength evident in his shoulders and hands, that she wanted to capture. She filled pages with studies of him, none quite perfect, but each attempt teaching her more about how to translate what she saw and what she felt onto paper. One evening in early September, Jacob came into the kitchen earlier than usual and found Hannah at the table, bent over her latest sketch. She tried to cover it, but he was too quick, lifting the paper to reveal his own face staring back at him from the page. "This is what you see when you look at me?" he asked, his voice odd. Hannah felt heat climb her cheeks. "I am sorry. I should have asked permission before. No, I am not upset. I am just surprised. You made me look almost handsome." He set the sketch down carefully and met her eyes. "Is that truly how you see me?" "You are handsome," Hannah said quietly. "I thought that the first time I saw you in Cherry Creek, even before I knew your character matched your face." Jacob's expression shifted, something intense flickering in his blue eyes. He reached across the table and took her right hand in his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Hannah, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen until I am finished." Her heart began to race. "All right. When you first arrived, I hired you because I needed help and you needed work. That was the whole of it, a practical arrangement for both of us, like you said." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But somewhere along the way that changed for me. You changed it. You walk into a room and everything feels lighter, brighter, better. You have made this house into a home. You have made me look forward to the end of each day because it means time talking with you. And somewhere in all of that, I fell in love with you." Hannah's breath caught. She wanted to speak, but he had asked her to listen, so she held silent even as hope and fear warred in her chest. "I know you have been hurt," Jacob continued. "I know you carry scars, both the ones I can see and the ones I cannot. I know you think those scars make you less somehow, make you unworthy of being loved. But you are wrong, Hannah. You are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever known, and I love you exactly as you are, scars and all. Especially the scars, because they are part of what made you into the woman sitting across from me right now." Tears spilled down Hannah's cheeks. "Jacob, I am not asking you to feel the same way," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know how I feel. If all you want is to keep working here as my housekeeper, I will respect that. If you want to leave, I will help you get set up somewhere else. But if there is any chance, any possibility that you might feel even a fraction of what I feel, then I am asking you to consider giving us a chance. Consider letting me court you properly. See where this might lead." Hannah pulled her hand free and stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Jacob's face fell, and he started to rise as well, but she moved around the table quickly and stopped him with a hand on his shoulder, her left hand, scarred and damaged but steady. "I need to show you something first. Before you say anything else, before you make any promises you might regret, you need to see all of it." "Hannah, you do not have to." "Yes, I do." Her hands went to the buttons of her collar, her fingers shaking but determined. "You said you love me, scars and all, but you have only seen a glimpse. You need to see the truth before you decide anything." She unbuttoned her collar and the top of her dress, easing the fabric off her left shoulder and arm. The lamplight fell across the full extent of the scarring, the twisted, mottled skin that covered her shoulder, upper arm, chest, and neck. She forced herself to stand still, to not cover herself, even as shame tried to make her hide. This was what she truly looked like beneath the concealing layers of fabric. This was the reality any man who claimed to love her would have to accept. Jacob stood slowly, his eyes on the scars but his expression unreadable. Hannah braced herself for disgust, for pity, for the moment when he would realize he had made a terrible mistake. But then he stepped closer, and his hand came up to gently trace the ridged skin on her shoulder. His touch was warm and unutterably tender. "Thank you for trusting me enough to show me," he said softly. Then he did something that shattered the last of Hannah's defenses. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her scarred shoulder, his lips gentle against the damaged skin. "These scars are part of you, Hannah, and I love every part of you." He kissed the ridge of scar tissue that climbed her neck. Every. Another kiss on her collarbone, single. A kiss at the junction of shoulder and arm. Part. He straightened and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "Do you believe me?" "I want to," Hannah whispered. "Then let me prove it." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose, giving her time to object or pull away. When she did neither, he finally kissed her lips, a sweet, gentle pressure that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. Hannah's arms came up to circle his neck, and she kissed him back with all the longing and hope and fear she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I meant every word, Hannah. I love you. Will you let me court you?" "Yes," Hannah breathed. "Yes, but Jacob, you need to know that I love you too. I think I have been falling in love with you since you first smiled at me in Cherry Creek, maybe even before that, when you offered me this job without knowing anything about me. I have been terrified to hope that you could feel the same way, because I thought no one would ever want me like this." "Then we have both been fools," Jacob said with a smile. "We could have been kissing for weeks now." Hannah laughed, a sound of pure joy that surprised her. Jacob kissed her again, deeper this time, and Hannah let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have this. She could have love and happiness, despite everything she had lost, despite the scars, despite the nightmares that still sometimes woke her in the dark. They spent the rest of the evening talking about what came next. Jacob wanted to court her properly, he said, which made Hannah laugh again because they were already living in the same house. But he insisted on doing things right, taking her to church socials in Cherry Creek, maybe even a dance if one was organized. He wanted everyone to know that Hannah Keller was his girl and that he was proud to be courting her. "People will talk," Hannah warned. "About my scars, about where I came from, about how quickly this happened." "Let them talk," Jacob said firmly. "I do not care what anyone thinks except you." Over the following weeks, Jacob was true to his word. He courted Hannah with a combination of old-fashioned propriety and genuine affection that made her fall even more deeply in love with him. He brought her wildflowers from the desert, their hardy blooms surviving in the harsh climate. He helped her hang the yellow curtains she had bought in town, then stood back and admired her work as if she had created a masterpiece. He took her riding on gentle horses, showing her the extent of his land and sharing his dreams for expanding the operation. The ranch hands noticed the shift in their employer's attention and approved almost unanimously. Tom, the old foreman, told Hannah one morning that he had not seen Jacob this happy in all the years he had known him. Young Billy was a little crestfallen to realize Hannah's affections were firmly fixed on Jacob, but he recovered quickly and started courting one of the girls in town with renewed determination. In late September, Jacob took Hannah to a church social in Cherry Creek. She wore her best dress, still high-collared and long-sleeved despite Jacob's gentle encouragement to wear something cooler, and Jacob wore his good suit and looked so handsome that Hannah's heart ached. They arrived to find the entire town gathered in and around the small church, tables laden with food, children running wild, adults clustered in conversation groups. Hannah felt the stares immediately, heard the whispers. The woman from Boston who was supposed to marry Samuel Morrison. The one living out at the Double H with Jacob Hayes and all those ranch hands. The one who always covered herself head to toe, even in 100-degree heat. She wanted to turn around and return to the wagon, but Jacob's hand was warm and steady on the small of her back, guiding her forward. "Jacob Hayes, you old dog." A portly man Hannah recognized as the owner of the livery stable approached with a wide grin. "Is this the young lady we have been hearing so much about?" "This is Miss Hannah Keller," Jacob said proudly. "Hannah, this is George Patterson. He runs the livery and charges too much for his services." "Do not listen to him," George laughed. "Fair prices for fair work, that is my motto. Miss Keller, it is a pleasure to meet you properly. Jacob has not stopped singing your praises since you arrived." More introductions followed, and Hannah found herself swept into the social fabric of Cherry Creek. The women wanted to know about Boston, about fashion trends from the East, about whether it was true that women in the cities were starting to ride bicycles. The men wanted to compliment Jacob on his good fortune in finding such a fine housekeeper and cook. The children darted around her skirts, playing tag and generally being rambunctious. At one point, an older woman approached Hannah with purpose in her eyes. This was Mrs. Abernathy, the local busybody, and she looked Hannah up and down with undisguised curiosity. "My dear, you must be roasting in those long sleeves. Why do you not wear something more suitable to the climate?" Before Hannah could formulate a response, Jacob appeared at her side. "Miss Keller dresses however she pleases, Mrs. Abernathy, which is one of the many things I admire about her." He took Hannah's hand openly, making his intentions clear to anyone watching. "She has more sense and style in her little finger than most people manage in their whole bodies." Mrs. Abernathy sniffed but retreated, and Jacob squeezed Hannah's hand. "You all right?" "I am all right," Hannah confirmed and meant it. She was learning to care less what strangers thought of her when Jacob's opinion was so clearly favorable. As evening fell, someone brought out a fiddle and another person produced a guitar, and impromptu dancing began on a flat area of ground near the church. Jacob led Hannah into the crowd and swept her into a simple waltz. She was not a particularly skilled dancer, but he was patient, guiding her through the steps, and soon she was laughing and spinning under the darkening Nevada sky. "I love you," Jacob said as they turned, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I know I told you before, but I wanted to say it again. I love you, Hannah Keller, and I want everyone to know it." "I love you too," Hannah replied, not caring who might overhear. "I love you, Jacob Hayes, and I cannot believe how lucky I am to have found you." "We found each other," Jacob corrected. "And we are both lucky." They danced until the musicians grew tired, then shared a piece of apple pie that one of the church ladies had contributed to the dessert table. On the ride back to the ranch, Hannah leaned against Jacob's shoulder and watched the stars wheeling overhead, feeling more content than she had in years. The scars still marked her body, the memories of the fire still haunted her dreams sometimes, but with Jacob beside her, those things felt manageable. She was learning to believe that she could have a future, not just as a survivor of tragedy, but as a woman who was loved and valued. In early October, Jacob asked Hannah to marry him. They were sitting on the porch of the ranch house after dinner, watching the sun set over the desert, when he turned to her with nervous energy crackling in every line of his body. "I know we have only been courting a few months," he said. "And I know this might seem rushed, but I am not a young man anymore, Hannah. I am 32 years old, and I have spent the last 10 years building this ranch with the thought that someday I would have a family to share it with. I thought that day might never come, and then you stepped off the train in Cherry Creek and walked into my life. I do not want to waste another moment. I want to marry you, build a life with you, have children with you if God wills it. I want to spend every day for the rest of my life proving to you that you are loved and cherished exactly as you are." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "This was my mother's ring. She would have loved you, I think. You have the same strength she did, the same determination to keep going no matter what life throws at you. Hannah Keller, will you marry me?" Hannah looked at the ring, at Jacob's earnest face, at the desert landscape spreading to the horizon, and felt her heart overflow. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, Jacob, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he kissed her with all the passion and tenderness she had come to expect from him, and Hannah kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into the connection between them. They set the wedding date for late November, giving Hannah time to make herself a proper wedding dress, and to prepare for the small ceremony they planned to hold at the ranch. Hannah worked on the dress in the evenings, choosing a design that featured long sleeves and a high collar, but was still more fashionable than her usual practical garments. She embroidered tiny flowers along the cuffs and neckline, putting her sewing skills to use creating something beautiful. Jacob threw himself into fixing up the ranch house even more, adding small touches he thought Hannah would appreciate. He built her a bookshelf for the small collection of books she had been accumulating. He purchased a rocking chair for the porch so they could sit together in the evenings. He even attempted to paint the bedroom they would share after the wedding, though Hannah lovingly took over the task when it became clear that painting was not among his many skills. The night before the wedding, Hannah could not sleep. She stood at her window looking out at the moonlit desert and thought about how dramatically her life had changed in the past 6 months. She had left Boston expecting to marry a stranger and live a quiet, practical life, managing a general store in a Nevada mining town. Instead, she was about to marry a man she loved with her entire heart, a man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and had responded with nothing but acceptance and love. There was a soft knock on her door, and Hannah opened it to find Jacob standing in the hallway, looking equally sleepless. "I know it is bad luck to see the bride before the wedding," he said. "But technically, it is already our wedding day since it is past midnight, so I figure that rule does not apply anymore." Hannah laughed and pulled him into her room. Propriety be damned. They sat together on her narrow bed, holding hands in the moonlight. "Are you nervous?" Jacob asked. "A little," Hannah admitted. "Not about marrying you. I have never been more certain of anything in my life, but about everything else. About being a good wife, about whether I can give you children after all the damage to my body, about whether I will ever stop having nightmares about the fire." Jacob brought her scarred hand to his lips and kissed each knuckle gently. "We will figure it out together. That is what marriage is, I think. Two people who decide to face whatever comes as a team. And as for children, we will be grateful for them if they come, and we will make a good life together even if they do not. Either way, we will have each other, and that is more than enough for me." "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes," Hannah whispered. "I am afraid of losing you the way I lost everyone else I have ever loved." "You will not lose me," Jacob promised. "I am healthy and careful and plan on being around to annoy you for the next 50 years at least. We are going to grow old together, Hannah, and bore our grandchildren with stories about how we met." Hannah leaned her head on his shoulder. "Tell me what you think our life will look like, 10 years from now, 20 years from now." Jacob was quiet for a moment, thinking. 10 years from now, I think the ranch will be twice as big. We will have more cattle, more men working for us, maybe even some horses to break and sell. The house will have been expanded, new rooms added for all the children I hope we will have by then. You will have paintings hanging on the walls, things you created, and everyone who visits will admire them. We will have roots here, deep ones, a place that is truly ours. 20 years from now," Hannah prompted. 20 years from now, our children will be grown or nearly grown. You will have gray in your hair, and I will be completely gray and probably creaking when I get out of bed in the morning. But we will still sit on that porch every evening and watch the sun set, and I will still be just as in love with you as I am right now. Maybe more, because I will have 20 extra years of reasons to love you." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I know the past has been hard for you, Hannah. I know you have lost so much, but we are building a future together, and I truly believe it is going to be beautiful." "I believe that too," Hannah said. "When I am with you, I believe anything is possible." They talked until the sky began to lighten with the approach of dawn, then reluctantly separated so Hannah could prepare for the wedding. She bathed and dressed in her new gown, arranging her hair in a simple style that she could manage on her own. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw not the ruined woman she had been when she arrived in Nevada, but a bride about to marry the man she loved. The scars were still visible above her collar, but they no longer seemed to define her. They were simply part of her story, part of what had brought her to this moment. The ceremony took place in the ranch house parlor in the early afternoon. The ranch hands had cleaned up and dressed in their best clothes, serving as witnesses and guests. Tom gave Hannah away, his weathered face proud as he placed her hand in Jacob's. The minister from Cherry Creek performed a simple but heartfelt service, and when Jacob kissed his bride, the assembled men cheered and whistled their approval. The celebration that followed was joyous and chaotic. The men had pitched in to roast a steer, and there was more food than everyone could possibly eat. Someone produced a jug of whiskey, and toasts were made to the happy couple's health and future. Young Billy played his harmonica, and there was more dancing on the packed earth in front of the house. As evening approached and the guests began to disperse, Jacob took Hannah's hand and led her away from the festivities to the bedroom they would now share. Hannah's heart raced as they crossed the threshold, knowing what was expected on a wedding night but uncertain how her damaged body would respond to intimacy. Jacob seemed to sense her nervousness. He lit the lamp, then turned to face her, his expression tender. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said quietly. "We have the rest of our lives. There is no rush." Hannah shook her head. "I want this. I want you. I am just afraid I will not be able to please you, that my scars will disgust you when you see all of them." "Hannah." Jacob stepped closer and began gently unbuttoning her dress. "I told you before that I love every part of you. Let me prove it." He undressed her slowly, carefully, revealing the full extent of her scars in the lamplight. The damaged skin covered her entire left shoulder and arm, swept across her chest and back, climbed up her neck. It was the first time anyone had seen her fully unclothed since the doctors who had treated her burns, and Hannah had to fight the urge to cover herself. But Jacob's eyes held only love and reverence as he looked at her. He traced the scars with his fingertips, learning the landscape of her body. Then, just as he had promised, he began to kiss every one of them. He kissed the scars on her shoulder, her arm, her chest, her back, her neck. He kissed the ridged tissue, the puckered skin, the places where the burns had been deepest. His lips were gentle and worshipful, and with each kiss he whispered words of love. "You are beautiful," he murmured against her skin. "So beautiful and so strong and so perfectly made." Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of healing, of release, of finally believing that she could be loved despite her brokenness. When Jacob finally made love to her, it was with a tenderness and passion that chased away every fear, every doubt, every moment of shame she had carried. Her body responded to his touch in ways she had not thought possible, and in his arms she felt whole for the first time since the fire. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Hannah's head on Jacob's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For seeing me, for loving me, for making me believe that I could have this." She pressed a kiss over his heart. "For every kindness you have shown me since the day we met." Jacob tightened his arms around her. "You do not have to thank me for loving you, Hannah. It is the easiest thing I have ever done." He paused, then added with a hint of humor in his voice, "Though I do expect you to continue making those apple pies, because those are definitely worth thanking you for." Hannah laughed and playfully swatted his chest. "I will make you all the apple pies you want, as long as you continue to help me hang curtains and paint rooms and all the other tasks you claim to be terrible at." "Deal," Jacob said, and sealed it with a kiss. The first year of their marriage was marked by deep contentment and steady work. Hannah settled fully into her role as Jacob's wife, managing the household with efficiency while also carving out time for her drawing and painting. Jacob had surprised her with a set of watercolors for Christmas, and she had taken to capturing the desert landscape in color, her right-handed technique improving with practice. In the spring, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She worried that her scarred body would not be able to carry a child safely, that the damage from the fire might somehow prevent a healthy pregnancy. But the local doctor, summoned from Cherry Creek to examine her, assured her that the scarring should not affect her ability to bear children. Jacob was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a father. He became even more protective of Hannah, insisting she rest more and work less, until she had to firmly remind him that pregnancy was not an illness. But his concern came from a place of love, and Hannah could not truly be angry with him for caring too much. The summer heat was brutal for a pregnant woman, and Hannah finally conceded to wearing lighter, looser clothing around the ranch, though she still kept her scars covered when anyone but Jacob was present. The ranch hands were respectful and helpful, falling over themselves to assist her with any task that seemed too strenuous. In late August, Hannah went into labor. It was a long and difficult birth, made more challenging by the heat and the distance from proper medical facilities. Jacob stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool water, and refusing to leave even when the midwife suggested he might be more comfortable waiting outside. After nearly 20 hours of labor, Hannah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel Jacob Hayes, honoring both the man whose death had inadvertently brought Hannah to Cherry Creek and the father who wept with joy as he held his son for the first time. "He is perfect," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are perfect. Thank you for giving me this, Hannah. Thank you for giving me a family." Hannah was too exhausted to do more than smile, but her heart was full as she watched her husband cradle their newborn son. She had thought her capacity for creating life had been destroyed in the fire along with so much else. But here was proof that she could still bring something new and beautiful into the world. Samuel was a healthy, happy baby who grew quickly and seemed to inherit his father's easy temperament. Hannah threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else, learning as she went and relying heavily on the advice of the other mothers in Cherry Creek. Jacob was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, teaching him to love the ranch and the desert that surrounded it even before Samuel was old enough to understand. When Samuel was 18 months old, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and in the spring of 1886, she gave birth to a daughter they named Grace Elizabeth Hayes. Grace had her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair, and she was a quieter baby than Samuel had been, content to observe the world around her with solemn attention. With 2 small children to care for, Hannah's days were fuller than ever, but she had never been happier. The nightmares about the fire had faded to occasional occurrences, and when they did wake her, Jacob was there to hold her until the fear passed. Her scars had faded somewhat with time, the angry red settling into white ridges that were still visible but less shocking. She no longer felt the need to hide them quite so desperately, though she still dressed modestly in public. The ranch continued to prosper under Jacob's management. He had expanded the operation just as he had predicted, acquiring more land and more cattle. The Double H was now one of the largest ranches in the area, and Jacob had earned a reputation as a fair employer and a skilled cattleman. He often spoke of expanding even further, perhaps into horse breeding, and Hannah encouraged his ambitions while managing the practical aspects of running an increasingly complex household. In the summer of 1887, tragedy struck when a wildfire swept through the area, driven by high winds and feeding on the dry vegetation. Hannah saw the smoke on the horizon and felt panic claw at her chest, the memories of her family's death rushing back with visceral intensity. But Jacob and his men worked tirelessly to create fire breaks and protect the ranch buildings, and through their efforts and a fortunate shift in the wind, the Double H was spared. That night, after the danger had passed and the children were asleep, Hannah broke down in Jacob's arms. "I thought I was going to lose everything again," she sobbed. "I thought the fire was going to take you and the children and the home we built. But it did not," Jacob said firmly. "We are all safe. The ranch is safe. You have to trust that not every fire ends in tragedy, Hannah. Sometimes we get to win." His words helped, but it took weeks for Hannah's nerves to fully settle. She found herself checking on the children obsessively, making sure the stove was properly banked each night, jumping at every unexpected sound. Jacob was patient with her anxiety, understanding that the wildfire had reopened old wounds that had never fully healed. As the children grew, Hannah made a point of teaching them about their family history. She told Samuel and Grace about their grandparents who had died in Boston, about the fire that had changed their mother's life, about the journey west that had led to the family they now had. She showed them her scars and explained what they meant, wanting them to understand that surviving hardship was nothing to be ashamed of. Samuel, who was now 5 years old and full of questions, asked one evening, "Did it hurt, Mama, when you got burned?" "Yes, sweetheart, it hurt very much," Hannah answered honestly. "It was the most painful thing I have ever experienced. But you got better," Samuel said with the simple faith of a child. "And then you came here and married Papa and had me and Grace." "That is exactly right," Hannah said, pulling him into a hug. "Sometimes we have to go through very hard things, but those hard things can lead us to good things we never expected. I would not have met your father if the fire had not happened, and then you and your sister would not exist. So even though it was terrible and painful, something beautiful came from it." Jacob, listening from the doorway, felt his heart swell with love for his wife. She had come so far from the terrified, damaged woman who had stepped off the train in Cherry Creek nearly 5 years ago. She had not only survived her trauma, but had transformed it into strength, into wisdom she could pass on to their children. He had known from the beginning that she was remarkable, but watching her grow into her role as wife and mother had only deepened his admiration and love. In 1889, Hannah gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Thomas David Hayes after the ranch foreman who had become like family to them. Old Tom had passed away the previous winter, and honoring him in this way felt right. Little Thomas was a sturdy, cheerful baby who seemed determined to keep up with his older siblings from the moment he could crawl. With 3 children under the age of 7, the ranch house often felt too small. Jacob began planning an expansion, adding several rooms and a proper second story. The construction took most of a year, but when it was finished, the Hayes family had a home that could accommodate their growing needs with room to spare. Hannah had also begun teaching Grace and Samuel their letters and numbers, serving as their schoolteacher in the absence of a proper school in Cherry Creek. She loved watching their minds develop, seeing them grasp new concepts and grow in understanding. Grace, in particular, showed an aptitude for learning that reminded Hannah of herself as a child, and Hannah made sure to encourage her daughter's curiosity. One afternoon in late spring of 1890, as Hannah was hanging laundry in the yard while keeping an eye on Thomas playing in the dirt nearby, a wagon approached the ranch. Hannah shaded her eyes and saw a woman she did not recognize driving, with what appeared to be several children in the back. The woman pulled up and climbed down, revealing herself to be young, perhaps early 20s, with a baby on her hip and exhaustion written in every line of her body. "I am sorry to trouble you," she said. "I am Mary Sullivan. My husband worked at one of the silver mines in Cherry Creek, but there was an accident 2 weeks ago. He was killed along with 4 other men. I have nowhere to go and 4 children to feed. I heard that the double H might have work, and I am willing to do anything cooking, cleaning, laundry, whatever you need." Hannah's heart went out to the young widow immediately. She recognized the desperation, the fear, the overwhelming need to provide for children in the face of impossible circumstances. "Wait here," she said, then went to find Jacob. He was in the barn, and when Hannah explained the situation, his response was immediate. "Of course we can help. We can always use extra hands, and with 3 children, you could probably use assistance around the house. See if she is willing to help you with the housework and child minding, and we will provide her with a salary and a cottage. We can fix up the old line shack on the east pasture. It is small but sturdy." Hannah returned to Mary with the offer, and the relief on the young woman's face was so profound that she burst into tears. "Thank you," she kept saying. "Thank you so much. You do not know what this means." "I do know," Hannah said gently. I was not so different from you when I came to Cherry Creek. I had lost everything and needed someone to give me a chance. Jacob gave me that chance, and it changed my life. Now we are paying that kindness forward. Mary Sullivan and her children moved into the renovated line shack and quickly became part of the ranch family. Mary was a hard worker and a talented cook, and she and Hannah developed a warm friendship based on mutual respect and shared experience of loss. The Sullivan children, ranging in age from 8 down to the baby, played with the Hayes children, and the ranch seemed to ring with young voices and laughter. As the 1890s progressed, the silver mining industry that had sustained Cherry Creek began to decline. The richest veins had been tapped out, and one by one, the mines closed. Many families left the area, seeking opportunities elsewhere, and Cherry Creek shrank to a fraction of its former size. But the Double H continued to thrive, anchored by the cattle business rather than the boom and bust cycle of mining. Jacob and Hannah's children grew into capable young people who loved the ranch and the life it offered. Samuel, now 12, was already working alongside his father, learning the cattle business from the ground up. Grace, at 10, helped her mother with the younger children and showed an interest in drawing and painting that Hannah nurtured carefully. Thomas, at 6, was wild and rambunctious, always getting into some kind of mischief that made Jacob laugh even as he tried to discipline the boy. In 1893, Hannah gave birth to their 4th child, a daughter named Rose Marie Hayes. Jacob joked that they were single-handedly repopulating Cherry Creek, but his joy at welcoming another daughter was unmistakable. He had always had a soft spot for his girls, and Rose quickly became the apple of her father's eye. That same year, Hannah had her first public exhibition of her artwork. The general store in Cherry Creek, now under new ownership, agreed to display several of her watercolors and drawings, and to Hannah's surprise, they sold within a week. The new store owner asked if she could provide more, and suddenly, Hannah found herself with a small but steady source of income from her art. It was validation she had not known she needed, proof that the talent she had thought destroyed by the fire had merely been waiting to be rediscovered. Jacob was immensely proud of her success, telling anyone who would listen that his wife was not just a talented homemaker, but a genuine artist. He purchased frames for her unsold pieces and hung them throughout the ranch house, creating a gallery of desert landscapes, portraits of their children, and studies of ranch life that documented their years together. As the new century approached, the Hayes family had become a pillar of the Cherry Creek community, such as it was. Jacob served on the town council and helped organize what few civic events still occurred in the dwindling settlement. Hannah taught Sunday school at the church and provided nursing care to sick neighbors when needed, drawing on knowledge she had acquired through years of caring for her own children and the ranch hands who occasionally suffered injuries. On their 15th wedding anniversary in November 1898, Jacob surprised Hannah with a trip to San Francisco. It was the first time either of them had left Nevada in years, and Hannah was nervous about being away from the children for 2 weeks, even though they would be well cared for by Mary Sullivan and the older ranch hands. But Jacob insisted they deserved a proper celebration, and once they arrived in the bustling city, Hannah was glad they had come. San Francisco was a revelation after the isolation of ranch life. They stayed in a proper hotel, dined in restaurants, attended the theater, and visited art galleries that left Hannah breathless with inspiration. Jacob commissioned a portrait photographer to take their picture, wanting to capture this moment in their lives. In the photograph, Hannah stood beside Jacob, her hand resting on his shoulder, her scars visible above the collar of her best dress. She had insisted on wearing something that showed them, wanting this record of who they truly were. "I am proud of these scars," she told Jacob when he questioned whether she was certain about the dress. "They are part of my story, part of what brought me to you. I do not want to hide them anymore." On their last night in San Francisco, as they walked along the waterfront watching ships come and go, Jacob pulled Hannah close. "Thank you for marrying me," he said. "Thank you for giving me 15 years of happiness I never expected to have. Thank you for our children, our home, our life together. You have made me the luckiest man alive, Hannah Hayes." "I am the lucky one," Hannah replied. "You took a broken woman and showed her she could be whole again. You loved me when I did not think I deserved love. You kissed my scars and made me believe they were beautiful. Everything good in my life has come from you." "We healed each other," Jacob said. "That is what love is supposed to do." They returned to the ranch refreshed and recommitted to the life they were building. The children had missed them but had managed well in their absence, and the ranch had functioned smoothly under the oversight of Samuel, who at 15 was already showing the leadership qualities that would serve him well in the future. As 1900 dawned, bringing a new century and new possibilities, the Hayes family gathered for a photograph in front of their ranch house. Jacob and Hannah stood at the center, surrounded by Samuel, now 17 and nearly as tall as his father, Grace at 15, poised on the brink of womanhood, Thomas at 11, all gangly limbs and mischievous grin, and Rose at 7, clutching her mother's hand. They were tanned and healthy, dressed in their best clothes, looking confident and prosperous. Hannah studied the photographer's final product when it arrived weeks later and marveled at the family they had created. These 4 children, this thriving ranch, this life of purpose and love, it had all grown from the ashes of tragedy. From the moment a desperate woman stepped off a train in Cherry Creek and met a cowboy willing to take a chance on her. The scars were visible in the photograph, just as they had been in the portrait from San Francisco. Hannah no longer tried to hide them, had not in years. They were part of her story, part of what had made her strong enough to build this life. And every time Jacob looked at them, whether in photographs or on her living skin, he saw not damage but survival, not ugliness but beauty hard won. In the spring of 1902, Samuel announced his intention to marry a girl from a neighboring ranch, the daughter of another cattle family who had weathered the decline of the mining industry. Jacob and Hannah gave their blessing, and the wedding was held at the Double H in June, with half the remaining population of Cherry Creek in attendance. Watching her son pledge his life to the woman he loved, Hannah thought back to her own wedding day nearly 19 years earlier and felt the circle of life completing itself. Grace, now 17, had developed into a talented artist in her own right, her skills surpassing even Hannah's. She had dreams of studying art in San Francisco or even further afield, and Hannah encouraged her ambitions even as she mourned the thought of her daughter leaving the ranch. Jacob, ever practical, suggested they wait until Grace was 18 and then arrange for her to study with a reputable teacher while boarding with family friends in the city. Thomas and Rose remained at home, both still in their school years, both showing aptitude for ranch life in different ways. Thomas had his father's easy way with horses and cattle, while Rose demonstrated a head for figures that suggested she might take over the business side of the operation someday. In the summer of 1903, Hannah and Jacob celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Their children arranged a party at the ranch, inviting everyone they knew to mark the occasion. It was a joyous affair, filled with music and dancing and speeches that praised the Hayes family's contributions to the community. At one point in the evening, Jacob pulled Hannah away from the crowd and led her to the spot where they had first kissed all those years ago, in the kitchen that had since been expanded and remodeled but still held the same essential character. "Do you remember?" he asked. "Every detail," Hannah said. "I remember being terrified that you would regret telling me you loved me once you saw all of my scars. I remember you kissing every one of them and making me believe I was worthy of love." "You were always worthy," Jacob said firmly. "You just needed someone to show you. And I needed someone to show me that a house could be a home, that a ranch could be a family, that love was still possible even when I had given up on finding it. We saved each other, Hannah." "We did," she agreed, "and we built something beautiful together." As they rejoined the party, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had survived fire and loss, had crossed a continent alone, had found love in the most unexpected place. She had born and raised 4 children, had rediscovered her artistic passion, had created a home and a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. The scars on her body had faded with time, the angry red settling into white lines that were barely noticeable except in certain lights. But Hannah no longer minded them. They were proof that she had survived, that she was stronger than the worst thing that had ever happened to her. And in Jacob's eyes, they had always been beautiful, markers of her strength and resilience. Years continued to pass in the steady rhythm of ranch life. Samuel and his wife presented Jacob and Hannah with their first grandchild in 1904, a healthy boy named Jacob Jr. after his grandfather. Grace left for San Francisco to study art as planned, writing long letters home describing her studies and the exciting cultural life of the city. Thomas took on more responsibility at the ranch, growing into a capable young man who would eventually take over day-to-day operations. Rose continued her education and showed promise as the family's business manager. In 1908, tragedy struck when a riding accident left Jacob with a broken leg that healed poorly. He was 57 years old, and the injury forced him to accept that he could no longer do the physical labor he had always taken for granted. He struggled with the limitation, chafing at his reduced capacity, until Hannah reminded him that leadership did not require the ability to rope cattle or break horses. His wisdom and experience were what truly mattered. "You gave me grace when I needed it," Hannah told him one evening as he sat on the porch, his healing leg propped on a stool. "You never made me feel less than whole, even when I was convinced I was broken beyond repair. Now I am asking you to give yourself the same grace. You are not diminished because you cannot do everything you once did. You are still the heart of this ranch, the foundation our family is built on." Her words helped, and Jacob learned to delegate more, trusting in the capable hands of his sons and the ranch hands who had been with him for years. He spent more time on the business side of the operation, less time in the saddle, and discovered that he rather enjoyed the shift. It gave him more time with Hannah, more evenings sitting on the porch watching the desert sunset, more mornings lingering over coffee and conversation. In 1910, Grace returned from San Francisco with a husband in tow, a fellow artist named William who charmed the entire family with his quick wit and genuine affection for Grace. They settled in Cherry Creek, opening a small gallery that attracted visitors from all over Nevada and beyond. Grace's paintings and William's sculptures brought new life to the struggling town, and Hannah was proud beyond measure of what her daughter had accomplished. Rose, now 17 and beautiful in a way that reminded Hannah of herself at that age, had attracted the attention of several young men from neighboring ranches. But she showed no interest in marrying young, insisting she wanted to attend business college first and learn modern accounting practices that could benefit the ranch. Jacob and Hannah supported her ambition, recognizing in their youngest daughter the same drive and determination that had built the Double H into what it was. As Hannah approached her 52nd birthday in 1911, she found herself reflecting on the life she had lived. She had been married to Jacob for 28 years, had raised 4 children to capable adulthood, had built a home and a legacy from nothing. The girl who had fled Boston in desperation, convinced she was too damaged for love or happiness, would not recognize the woman Hannah had become. One evening, as she and Jacob sat in their customary spot on the porch, watching the familiar desert landscape painted gold by the setting sun, Hannah reached for his hand. "Do you remember what you said to me the night before we married, about what you thought our life would look like?" "I remember," Jacob said. "I predicted we would expand the ranch, have children, grow old together. I believe I said I would be completely gray and creaking when I got out of bed, which has proven entirely accurate." Hannah laughed. "You were right about all of it. But you left out the best parts: the grandchildren, Grace's gallery, Samuel taking over the ranch, Rose's business acumen. You could not have predicted how rich our life would become." "I knew it would be good," Jacob said. "I knew that any life with you would be better than anything I could imagine on my own. But you are right. The reality has surpassed even my most optimistic predictions." He brought her scarred hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture so familiar after nearly 3 decades that Hannah barely noticed it. "I love you, Hannah Hayes. I have loved you since the day you walked up to my wagon in Cherry Creek and asked about a job. I will love you until the day I die, and probably beyond that if such things are possible." "I love you too," Hannah said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You gave me everything I thought I had lost forever: love, family, purpose, a place to belong. You kissed my scars and made me believe I was beautiful. You saw past the damage to the person I really was. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon and stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the house behind them, they could hear Rose practicing piano, the music drifting through the open windows. In the distance, cattle lowed in the evening quiet and the desert wind whispered through the sagebrush. This was the life they had built together, piece by careful piece, from the broken fragments of Hannah's past and the lonely bachelor existence Jacob had been living. They had created something enduring, something that would continue through their children and grandchildren, through the ranch that bore Jacob's name and the art that bore Hannah's vision. The scars that had once defined Hannah's existence were simply part of her now, no more or less significant than any other aspect of her appearance. They told a story of survival and resilience, of love that saw past surface damage to the essential worth beneath. And every time Jacob looked at them, every time he traced them with gentle fingers or kissed them with tender lips, he reminded Hannah that she was not broken, had never been broken, was exactly who she was meant to be. In the years that followed, the Hayes family continued to grow and evolve. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter. The cattle business remained steady, weathering droughts and market fluctuations through careful management and the wisdom of experience. Cherry Creek never regrew to its mining-era glory, but it stabilized as a small ranching community, anchored by families like the Hayes who had chosen to make the desert their permanent home. Hannah continued to paint, her work evolving as she aged, becoming more abstract and expressive. She had exhibitions in Reno and even Carson City, building a modest reputation as Nevada's premier landscape artist. The money she earned from her art went into a fund for the grandchildren's education, ensuring that they would have opportunities she had never had. Jacob, despite his bad leg, remained active in ranch management until well into his 70s, finally stepping back only when Samuel insisted with gentle firmness that it was time to let the younger generation take full control. In retirement, Jacob spent his days reading, working on his memoirs at Hannah's encouragement, and doting on his ever-increasing number of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1923, the Hayes family threw a massive celebration at the Double H. Nearly 100 people attended, including grandchildren, great-grandchildren, old ranch hands, neighbors, and friends from across Nevada. A photographer captured the extended family, and in that picture, Jacob and Hannah sat at the center, their children and grandchildren arrayed around them, multiple generations of the family they had created together. Hannah was 64 years old in that photograph, her blonde hair now completely silver, her face lined with age and sun and laughter. The scars were still visible above the collar of her dress, but they had faded to pale lines that blended with the other marks of time on her skin. Jacob sat beside her, his hair white, his shoulders slightly stooped, his blue eyes still bright and fixed on his wife with unmistakable adoration. 40 years, Hannah marveled that evening as they escaped the party for a quiet moment alone. "We have been married for 40 years, Jacob. We have built this family, this ranch, this life. How did we get so lucky?" "It was not luck," Jacob said. "It was choice. You chose to take a chance on a rancher you did not know. I chose to see past your scars to the remarkable woman beneath. We chose to love each other through hard times and good times, through children and grandchildren, through droughts and plenty. That was not luck, sweetheart. That was us deciding every single day to build something together." Hannah kissed him, a kiss that still held passion after 4 decades of marriage, still made her heart race the way it had when she was a young woman newly in love. "I would choose you again," she whispered. 1,000 times over I would choose you." "And I would choose you," Jacob replied. "Every single time." They returned to the party hand in hand, ready to celebrate the life they had built and the love that had sustained them through 40 years of marriage, ready to face whatever years remained with the same courage and commitment that had brought them this far. Jacob Hayes passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1927, just shy of his 76th birthday. He had lived a full life, had seen his children grown and successful, had known his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, had built a legacy that would endure for generations. Hannah grieved deeply, but not hopelessly, knowing that she had been blessed with 44 years of love and partnership that many people never experienced. She lived another 12 years, remaining active and engaged with the ranch and her family until the very end. She painted until her hands could no longer hold a brush, producing some of her finest work in those final years. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories of the old days, of crossing the continent alone, of meeting their grandfather, of building the Double H from nothing. And she made sure they understood the meaning of her scars, the story they told. "These marks show that I survived," she told them. "They show that I was strong enough to endure fire and loss and come out the other side. They show that your grandfather loved me enough to see past damage to the person I really was. Never be ashamed of your scars, children. They are proof that you lived, that you fought, that you overcame. They are beautiful because they mean you survived." Hannah Hayes died in the autumn of 1939 at the age of 80, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who mourned her passing, but celebrated the incredible life she had lived. She was buried beside Jacob on a hill overlooking the Double H, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and the dates of their lives. But their true legacy was not in stone markers. It was in the ranch that still bore the Hayes name, in the children and grandchildren who carried forward their values and their love, in the paintings that hung in galleries and homes across Nevada, in the story of a mail-order bride with scars she tried to hide and a cowboy who kissed every one of them, teaching her that she was beautiful and worthy of love exactly as she was. Their story became legend in Cherry Creek, passed down through generations as an example of what true love looked like, not the superficial attraction of youth, but the deep, abiding commitment of two people who chose each other every single day, who saw each other's scars and loved them for the strength they represented, who built a life together from broken pieces and created something enduring and beautiful. And every time someone at the Double H told the story of how Jacob and Hannah Hayes met, how they fell in love, how they built their legacy, they made sure to include the detail that defined their relationship, that Jacob had kissed every one of Hannah's scars, showing her through that simple act that she was not broken, was not damaged beyond repair, was exactly who she was meant to be. That love, that acceptance, that unwavering commitment, that was the foundation everything else was built on. The legacy that mattered more than land or cattle or even the grandchildren who carried their names forward into the future. The story of Hannah and Jacob Hayes was the story of love in its truest, most redemptive form, the love that heals, that transforms, that proves that even our deepest scars can become sources of beauty when seen through the right eyes. And that story, told and retold across generations, continued to inspire and give hope to anyone who had ever felt broken beyond repair, reminding them that somewhere out there, someone might see them truly, love them wholly, and kiss every one of their scars until they learned to believe they were beautiful.